Picture this. You walk into a bank, sit across from a lender, and ask the exact same question almost every single Australian is asking right now. And you know what? The answer usually hits a whole lot harder than people expect. Why? Well, because the fundamental rules of property ownership in this country have completely shifted, like entirely shifted, in ways nobody is really talking about on the evening news. So in this explainer, we're going to break down the math across 4 completely different financial worlds to reveal the absolute truth about who is actually buying homes today, and more importantly, how they're pulling it off.
Okay, let's dive into this. How much house can you actually afford? It's the million-dollar question, right? Sometimes literally. Look, I know this brings up a ton of financial anxiety for a lot of us, but we really need to face it with a stark reality check. By the end of this, you're going to know exactly where you stand. We'll look at what income you actually need and what deposit unlocks each specific tier of the property market. But before we look at those specific price tags, we've got to understand the current environment we're operating in.
So here's the rather harsh economic backdrop as of mid-2026. After 3 rate hikes earlier this year, the RBA cash rate is sitting at 4.35%. That puts your average owner-occupier variable rate at roughly 5.98%. Now, national house prices have flatlined. Sydney's even slipped by 0.9%, and places like Melbourne and Hobart are definitely softening. Sure, Brisbane, Perth, and Adelaide are creeping up just a tiny bit, but the overall heat, it's gone. But here is the absolutely critical takeaway. Even in this slightly softer market, the affordability gap hasn't closed at all. Why? Because prices cooling by 1% does basically nothing when our wages simply haven't kept pace with a whole decade of massive growth. The math still bites hard.
So let's start with Section 1, Tier 1, the $250,000 relic.
Now, a $250,000 home sounds like a total myth from another decade, right? But they do actually exist. You just have to look out in regional areas. Think regional Tasmania, the mining towns out in outback Queensland, regional South Australia, or some of those smaller towns in WA. If you have a 20% deposit, which is 50 grand, plus maybe another 10 grand for stamp duty and costs, your loan is $200,000. At our current average rate of 5.98%, your monthly repayment sits at roughly $1,200. Honestly, a single person earning a modest $65,000 a year can comfortably pass the bank's stress test here. Even with APRA's 3% safety buffer pushing that test rate to near 9%, it's incredibly doable. The catch? You're buying access to a regional town, not a major capital city. But there is a massive hidden upside to buying cheap and regional that almost nobody talks about. If you own a home outright in your early 30s, it frees up cash that most city dwellers won't see until they hit their 50s. And that extra breathing room, that becomes your seed money. It allows you to start building true wealth through assets early on, which, as you'll see later in this explainer, is exactly how the wealthiest Australians got their start. Moving right along, we hit Section 2, Tier 2, the $500,000 stretch. This tier puts us in a completely different conversation. Now we're talking about the outer suburbs of Adelaide, regional New South Wales, the outskirts of Hobart, and the more affordable pockets of Perth and Brisbane. So, with a 20% deposit of $100,000, your loan is $400,000. That bumps the monthly repayment up significantly to roughly $2,395. To pass the bank's stress test, to prove you could still make payments if interest rates spiked, you need a household income of between $95,000 and $110,000. So the crucial point here is that while a single earner on an above-average salary can stretch into this tier, it's really designed for a couple. 2 partners earning $55,000 each will basically sail right through. But let's be real, saving $100,000 is extremely tough. Enter the first home buyer's secret weapon, the expanded 5% deposit scheme. Since there are no income caps and unlimited places now, you can enter the market with just $25,000. But I've got to warn you, the trade-off is simple but heavy. A smaller deposit means a much bigger loan, which means you're paying far more interest over the life of the mortgage. It opens the door a lot faster, for sure, but you're walking in carrying a lot more weight.
All right, on to Section 3, Tier 3, the $1 million squeeze.
And this brilliantly illustrates the new normal. This tier represents the standard family home in Middle Brisbane, Outer Sydney, most of Melbourne, and Inner Perth. The exact house your parents likely bought for $180 grand. But to afford a $1 million home today with a $200,000 deposit and an $800,000 loan, the bank wants to see a household income of $180,000 to $200,000 a year. But take a look at that median household income bar on the chart. The median Australian household only brings in about $100,000 a year. So the median income is literally half of what's needed to buy a median home.
That massive gap explains this truly staggering number, 45.9%. The typical household now spends almost half of their income just covering a new mortgage. It precisely explains why so many people out there earning really good money feel like they're absolutely drowning in mortgage stress, basically wrecking their 20s and 30s. The math just doesn't work for a single standard income anymore. And hiding right inside this squeeze is a massive generational gap. Buyers who got into the market before 2015 possess this incredible, invisible advantage. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in untouched, built-up equity. They're leveraging this as deposits for investment properties, or they're acting as the bank of mom and dad for their kids. Essentially, they're playing a completely different game than the rest of us.
Which brings us to our final tier, Section 4, Tier 4, the $2 million impossibility.
We are talking about inner Sydney, Bayside Melbourne, beachside Perth, and the real prestige pockets of Brisbane. With a 20% deposit of $400,000, your loan is $1.6 million. That makes your monthly repayment a massive $9,580. To even be considered for a loan of that size, banks want to see a staggering minimum household income of $350,000 a year, and often more once those safety buffers are applied. So it really begs the ultimate question: who on earth is actually buying these homes? The answer is the major paradigm shift of this entire explainer. It is rarely two people on regular salaries. It's business owners, investors using equity, and folks with secondary, non-job incomes. As this quote perfectly captures, they are not earning their way into million-dollar homes, they are owning their way in. Regular, standard salaries just aren't buying these prestige properties anymore. Wealth-building assets are. This brings us to Section 5, the core lesson, salary versus assets. Here is exactly why wealth building through assets completely outperforms relying on a regular paycheck. On side A, a regular salary scales linearly, right? You're just treating your hours for dollars. Plus, it gets heavily taxed at your highest marginal rate the absolute second it hits your bank account. Mathematically, it severely limits your ceiling. At best, it buys you a regional home or some severe suburban mortgage stress. But on side B, assets scale exponentially. They grow passively in the background, 24/7. They compound. And they often sit inside tax-advantaged structures that build wealth in ways a traditional payslip never, ever can. Relying solely on a regular salary completely caps what you can buy. Wealth building through assets shatters that ceiling and buys you the $2 million home. So what exactly separates that top tier from the rest of the struggling market? It's this ownership arsenal. They hold businesses, investments, dividend-paying shares, and income-producing property. This is the exact vehicle that moves people up the ladder, while everyone else is left arguing about whether the RBA is going to cut or hold rates at their next meeting. Finally, Section 6, your new blueprint. Listen, if you want to fundamentally change your financial trajectory, the fastest way to afford a better home is not to just chase a bigger paycheck. It's to build something you actually own. Here are practical steps you can literally take tonight. Step 1, start small. Put just $50 a week into an index fund to get your money working for you in the background. Step 2, look into starting a small side business in the evenings. Step 3, sit down and map out just one income stream that does not depend on your day job. In a country where the median house costs more than 10 times the median income, we have to stop relying solely on a wage. You've got to start building a portfolio of assets. I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Are you going to keep running on the treadmill, chasing a bigger paycheck that just gets eaten up by taxes and inflation? Or will you start building something you actually own? That choice literally dictates which property tier you'll eventually call home. If this explainer opened your eyes to where you really stand in Australia's housing market, please hit that like button. And if you want to keep learning and stay ahead of the curve, make sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications. You will not want to miss our next deep dive. Thanks for learning with us, and we'll catch you in the next explainer.